people together through the colorful fun, the humorous nature of the brand. But we knew that in today's society, we needed to be more representative of the dynamic, progressive world that we live in. And so for a brand like M&M's, one of our key tools is our characters. So we took a step back and took a look at their personalities, their backstories, their characteristics, even how they looked, and said, okay, how can we ensure that we are future-proofing the business, but also future-proofing the brand and ensuring that we stay relevant? We couldn't rest on our laurels. So what we did was we evolved their personalities, their backstories, and how they show up. We also launched a new character. Her name is Purple. And even within that, we saw a lot more people, finding themselves in the characters, being able to relate to them, which was really important. But also as we think about continuing to stay relevant through the acts and behaviors, we know that purpose, which is why we're here, is incredibly important. And we are on our purpose journey. And us evolving our characters was the first step to do that. Being a big iconic brand like M&M's, we can't just sit back and rest on our laurels, because what got us here for 82 years is not going to set us up for success for the next 82.
One of the things you talked about, and I would love to hear just a little bit about this, is one of the things that I noticed is that you changed, in some cases, the footwear. And I think it was the female M&Ms. I don't remember if
Green.
Green. Okay, of course. How could I forget her name? Green. That there was a decision made to not be portraying her footwear in a way that was so considered
like stereotypical.
Stereotypical, right? In terms of what women's footwear would look like. And I follow social media, of course. And there were some people that actually were upset about that. They were like, I miss the high heels, and what are you doing? And it's okay for her to be a girl M&M wearing high heels. It doesn't have to be in sneakers.
Yeah.
Were there just briefly, any internal conversations around that? And how did you decide to respond to that, if at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. And even my aunt gave me a call and was like, hey, let me tell you about how many high heel shoes I have. There's nothing wrong with high heels, which we agree. And it doesn't mean that they're not in Green's closet, right? And so what we wanted to do was, That
is an excellent answer.
Right. And of course, you guys saw the outsized conversation that we had in the media and the press, etc. And the reality is, we're a chocolate brand. We don't take political stances or views. We're here for all fun kind, hashtag that. But the reality is that we wanted to be more representative, right? Not every woman wants to or needs to wear high heels. In Green, we've evolved her personality to be all about empowerment, confidence, and uplifting other women as well. So we thought it was a necessary change. We didn't expect the outsized conversation, but ultimately it landed in a really positive place.
Great, thank you. I've always been kind of wondering that personally, so I'm glad I got a chance to ask you in front of all these people. Kristen, the next question's for you, and it sort of comes out of that question. So again, doing research, 131-year-old brand, as I know that you are aware, and I am old enough to remember New Coke as an example. And so I think that was an effort, I think at the time, to evolve, I think, for what was seen as the changing tastes, et cetera. And, so with any sort of move forward, there can always be the concern about what the reaction is. How do you view your role in the company in terms of keeping the brand fresh, but in not touching the things that people find so comforting and that are a part of your legacy in terms of the brand and what it fills in their life?
It's a great question. First, we're 137 years.
137.
Incredible.
Right.
Yes. 137.
Oh, you know what? You're right. I need reading glasses.
Yeah.
The one looks...
The one looks like a 7. The 7 looks like a 1. But what I will tell you is, that's definitely been a very intentional thing that our leadership has done, right? It is a very old and historic, great legacy brand and organization. We've brought in a lot of new talent over the past several years to make sure that we have diversity and representation and that culture of belonging so that we can bring in new ideas and help, challenge the status quo in the right ways. So when you think about something like New Coke, which obviously didn't go as that had intended many years ago, I would say my role right now, as well as any of our leaders, and they're here today as well in the organization, is helping us connect with our consumers in a really intentional way. So when you think about what is core to their beliefs and what is core to what are the truths about that consumer, then you're really able to help, evolve the brand in the right way. So for example, for us, Coke Creations is a good example of that, where we have, these sort of mini creations that come out of trademark Coke, and they resonate with a very specific consumer, but you're still not touching the original trademark iconic brand. And that protection, I think, is also very important because people feel very passionately about their brands. And I know myself, I'm a Coke Zero drinker. I don't want anyone to touch that. I love it. So, we have to be respectful of that as well.
There have been books written on New Coke, right? And what companies can learn, what Coca-Cola learned, but I think that's that's a great lesson. So you can leave the iconic brand alone, but then use that as a launching pad for other niche brands. But don't touch the iconic one.
Exactly, and if I can comment on that too, it is also about having the culture of being able to fail forward, right? And so I tell my team all the time, we win or we learn. And when you learn something, it's equally as important to share what those learnings were, what didn't work well, how can we learn from that so that the next time around we're able to move it forward. So celebrating those wins and those learnings, while hard and definitely very humbling at times, can help us move forward as an organization.
That's great. Wonderful. Casey, so I'm going to do a little name dropping here. So, Alice Walton and I just call her Alice, because we're very close. I actually happened to be at Crystal Bridges a few years ago, and she was there, which was extraordinary, and she was taking a group of young people, I think high schoolers, around and giving them a personal tour of the museum, which was extraordinary. And I and a couple of other people were introduced to her and got to accompany her. And you can only imagine, I mean, you have that experience every day, but how it is to walk and to see someone's vision and to hear about the art she had collected through the years, how she had done it, that it was sitting in barns, that she had, it just was extraordinary. And then to hear her tell these young people about how she approached why it was important to her here in her hometown, what she felt it offered, because there are so many places geographically that can be a bit of a desert in terms of art and culture and museums, just because the city hasn't had a way to support it previously. So this notion that she was creating this space for families, and in some cases many people that may have not been to a major exhibition before and certainly not seen some of these world-class artists. It was really, it's so inspiring that someone that has the means to do that did that. But one of the challenges I know has been, how does one demystify art? How does one make people unafraid of art? Because it can sometimes have a reputation of like, will I feel not smart if I go there? Do I take my children? How do you, with one of the most extraordinary American art collections, the world contemporary art collections, how do you find that message so that people know all are welcome?
Thank you for that question, and it is a real treat to have Alice walk you around the galleries. If you haven't done that, I'm sorry.
I bumped into her again last night too, Pat and I at dinner, but no biggie. I think Alice is kind of following me.
But I do think that part of the work that we do as a marketing and communications team is really trying to find that point of empathy with people, and really breaking down those walls. We know that museums are places that historically have been places of privilege, where there is an expectation that you might have to have a PhD to read an art label, in the minds of a lot of folks who don't necessarily come into the museums that you see underrepresented in museum spaces. And so what we've been tasked with doing is really trying to use the power of story, to break down those walls. So we have the best assets in the world. Like, I get to market the most amazing product every single day. And because of the breadth of our collection and the intention that our founder had with really wanting to have this access point we have the assets to really tap into and to tell those stories. And so when we look at how our collection is built and being built, and the stories that we have to tell from that collection, that becomes a hook. We have so many stories that are layered into the art that are just waiting to be told, and things that resonate with people in ways that you don't necessarily get in a classroom or in a book. And I think museums are these spaces of non-traditional learning that really are places where we can actually, really teach about, how we become a more inclusive society. And I think that's the power of art in art museums.
And Alice spoke of that. I mean, she said it out loud. She said it wasn't even that you didn't necessarily learn some of these lessons in school. They are just deliberately not taught. Indigenous people, I think that first room, I know that the collection is dynamic, but the first room is the Frank family from Germany, the Jewish family that helped fund the Revolutionary War. And she said there's a story that you don't hear told in schools. I mean, some of these stories are deliberately omitted. And so for this museum and for her vision to come into to try to fill that in is really extraordinary. But it must be a little overwhelming when you go in every day too. It's like having all those resources is great, but then you can't rely on the excuse that you don't have enough resources. But no, I really, one of the things I have to say personally, when I went, I walked around the gardens, and some of the sculptures were deliberately put there for kids to climb on, right? Versus some other museums where it's like, don't touch, don't get on this. It was just so great to see, and the diversity of the families that you saw there too.
Yeah, and I think that's by intention. I think what we have on our side is a little bit of our youth, so we don't have a 137-year legacy. We're 12 years old, and I think with how young we are as a museum, we are actually coming out the gate doing things that are totally different, I think, by design. And so this notion of like what an art museum is, and the kind of space that we can be in terms of welcoming community, is like we're challenging a lot of those perceptions and those ideas about what these spaces are.
That's a great point, because you're not negotiating with the board of the Met, on like what should we be now. You can build it, and you have the freedom because you have Alice, and it's fantastic. Denise, coming to you. So you touched on it very briefly on when you gave your bio and your title, that belonging, and I believe that your predecessor did not have belonging. I think it was a more traditional Chief Diversity Officer title, and I think it's fascinating, and that we'd like to hear about. As I see other companies doing the same thing, why it was important to add belonging in. What do you see as the definition of belonging versus, or in addition to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how do you plan? I know you're only 8 weeks on the job. We just talked about that. So, yeah. And how do you plan to implement that against this global multi-million employee population?
And that's about 10 questions, but thank you for that.
They always are. But I do that on purpose.
Thank you for every one of them.
You only have to answer one. See, I do that on purpose so you can pick which one.
All right, I'll pick one. So the title of belonging was actually my idea. So on the evening that I accepted the offer, I very quickly pivoted to, let's discuss the title. Because for the last 30 years, we've had chief diversity officers. And I'd often ask the question, what other function in a corporate setting would be permitted to make incremental movement and not real impact? And so when I thought about the diversity title, I asked a group of white males, like, what does diversity mean to you? And when you think of diversity, you think it's for women and it's for people of color. And so as I had done the work at my previous company at Johnson Controls, it became glaringly clear to me that I wanted everyone engaged in the work. And I wanted the work to be the work of the employees, and here at Walmart, the work of the associates, and not the work of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and here, the Office of Belonging. And so I decided that, and I begged previously in my previous role, can we please change my title? Can we please change my title? And the CHRO was very traditional and wouldn't do it. So here, I was determined that I'd get a title change because I wanted to bring everyone into the fold. I wanted everyone at the company to feel a sense of belonging and to engage, in a very meaningful way. And so in light of what's happening politically around us, and again, I said, hey, the political environment is charged, it would be so much nicer if we had a title that didn't cause division, whether intended or not, and that was never the intent. But how do we win? How do we get ahead of the game? And for me, it's about getting results as opposed to being right. So I thought a title change would lend itself to additional leverage and the opportunity to have additional impact. And so on to the question of, how do you do this? How do you scale this across 2.1 million, associates? And that was one of my key concerns during the interview process. And then every leader that I met with said, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. And they just downplayed the size of Walmart. And so it became clear to me also throughout the interview process that the folks at Walmart really don't dwell on their size. They dwell on results. They dwell on what needs to be done and how we're going to accomplish it, and let's go get it done. And I'm a very results-oriented person, and so for me, it was to get the work to the level and infused and embedded in the organization in the way in which we would like to. I recognize that it becomes very, very important that you have a very clear vision, have a very clear mission, you have a roadmap, and you have an overarching strategy for the entire organization. And then, you can start small in a specific area, and then you can scale and repeat. So the whole premise is to be very clear about what it is you want to accomplish, and then you can, select a group, a function, a business, get it done, prove it up, and then scale and repeat it across the rest of the enterprise.
I guess that is such an enlightening answer, because it could be overwhelming to think about the 2.1 million. And if you think about that, you'll be paralyzed, right? I mean, you will not be able to do anything. And instead, if you take pockets and then think about scale. Love that. The other thing, there is a great executive tip in there, and that is that negotiate for something that the change at the beginning. Because once you're in, a year later, they're being like, no, it's Chief Diversity, we told you. But in the beginning, they were like, we really want her. She said, yes, if we say no to this, we might lose her. So that's a great negotiating tactic.
Absolutely.
Great. Mindy, and I know a little bit of the answer because we met on the call previously, and I was fascinated, and you saw me, I jumped in, I was like, oh my God, because we're a company that also has animation, but animation, and we have a program, I think I told you, I believe one of the only ones now in the company that is designed for underrepresented groups, which is women and people of color, LGBTQ community as well, and I made the comment that about the underrepresentation, and you enlightened me, and I'd like you to enlighten the rest of this group. It has been seen to me, like so many industries, as an industry that is, or a part of the industry that is not welcoming to women. And sometimes that's not because they're not doing the work, it's because that's not who's being presented, and I'm going to let you elaborate on that. But how have you seen that change, and talk about your work as a historian in terms of being a truth teller on this versus what people see?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question and a big one. In the industry of animation at Disney, we work in story. And I was thrilled to hear you talk about story as well and the impact that has. And we have now celebrating our 100th anniversary in great storytelling. Working in a company with a long histories and volumes of folks and coming across in diverse areas, the challenges are there are a lot of myths that get established. And so we have, when I had first started the company, almost 30 years ago, there were a lot of myths that still were entrenched there, even at the studio. The 9 old men of animation. It was all Walt Disney who did everything, and there were maybe 3 women who worked in animation? Oh, that'll be an easy subject, no problem. So we all fed into that. That was perpetuated. It was part of the culture, in continuing, extending the the heritage, the lineage of what had unfolded. Now, animation as a topic, many great authors have come forward to explore the history of this art form, largely men. To paraphrase Jane Austen, men have always had the pen in their hand. So our history, our collected history of animation, had been told by men about men. History is recorded, written about, preserved, archived, documented, and presented from a male perspective. And it never had really crossed my purview until I was working on the Ink and Paint volume, the book that sort of brings me to what I do. When I started writing the book, we thought it was going to be a charming little volume, a little book about pretty girls who traced and colored. That was the going log line of where women's roles were. And yet loads of books and films and documentation about the wonderful, great, extraordinary men, which they are. We love our men with pencils that have erasers. But the women were doing line work, correcting their lines, cleaning their lines. What you see on screen is the work of women. And it is in permanent ink, not erasers. So it was an avalanche to make this discovery. And historically, so I was challenged with history writers just reducing down the work of women and other artists to one line because it was so complex. The rubric of what they accomplished, the artistry, the level of artistry required and accomplished had never been explored. So historically, there were those challenges. You may come across that too in a company as old as Coca-Cola, where you have these deeply entrenched falsehoods that have to be changed. But somebody's got to do the digging. Someone's got to do the exploring. So it has shifted things. The animation industry largely was this few schools. I teach at CalArts, a premier school for animation training. We had about 80% men, maybe 20% women when I started teaching. Now it's inverted. My classrooms are about 80% women studying, and men are at about 20%. My coursework shifts that, changes it, because we get the complete story now, the full half, the other half that had been neglected and reduced down to a very minimal log line. So the company has shifted dramatically because they didn't even know their own history. They didn't know their own story. When I went in to research the book, thinking it was going to be about pretty girls who traced and colored and charming stories, I had about a folder that I asked for everything on certain films and the original ledgers to go through to see where the materials-based work was, and everything on the women and the ink and paint department and their general roles. I had boxes of things to go through on the films, of course. I had stacks of ledgers to go through to find out where they were getting their materials. And I had a folder, they came out with a folder that had 5 pieces of paper in it. That was it for women. Wow. So even within the company, there had been a deeply entrenched narrative of, it was all men.
Well, and very little reason for people to want to change the narrative until somebody goes in and exposes it. I mean,
exactly.
that narrative worked just fine. But you make me think of a couple things. One, how do we see this in film school? It's pretty much 50-50 in most film schools, men and women. And yet, the number of women that are directing films, especially large films, is shockingly low. High single to low double digits.
Roughly 10%.
Yeah.
We're at about 10 to 12%.
10 to 12%. I was going to say 15, but that might have been like a high point. So 10 to 12%. So the question is, what's happening and how do we make sure that those 80% of the women have the opportunities in animation? Because we can be graduating people all over the place, but if people aren't hiring them,
Well, the work has been, again, this sort of opened up a doorway, a career path for me, sort of indirectly. But I do a lot of work at various studios with the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Women in Animation, Black Women Animate, Latinx animators. There are now wonderful organizations, grassroots organizations, that are evolving to get the voices out there. And I take every opportunity to speak, lecture, present wherever I can. And you can physically see the audiences shift when they see,
well, I mean,
women have been there.
It goes back to
it's education.
What
it
Gina
really is
says.
educating.
Well, and it's about being told the story and about representation. So it's like, if you can see it, you can be it. Gina tells the story about the year after she was took up archery, or when she was, which Olympics was that she was competing for? Australia, and that she became a role model for young girls, because that wasn't then or even now as much of a sport that the little girls or women thought was for them. And then she also tells a story, and I always blank out on the movie. It was animated about the Brave,
yeah,
exactly.
Brenda Chapman's film, yeah.
And some research she saw afterwards. The year after that movie came out, enrollment for young girls in archery school went up like 300%.
Yeah.
I mean, so again, it's just
The
something so
impact.
basic, just being able to see yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this work. I mean, it also goes back to, let's take something as basic as Thanksgiving. The Tale of Thanksgiving and the role of Native Americans, that was written by non-Indigenous people, as you can tell by the way the tale's been told. So the person that holds the pen gets to tell the story,
Yeah.
unless you're in there digging it up. So thank you.
Yeah, it's
wonderful.
been
Thank you.
remarkable work, but the impact is important, and,
It is,
and
yeah.
the work done by everyone here it's making a difference.
Denise, you touched on this a little bit, and I wanted to actually ask this question of Chanel as well. How many employees is Mars worldwide?
Over 140,000.
Okay, so again, a big organization. In this world, and Denise made an excellent point, when you talk about an employee population, that means you have people on all sides of political spectrum, all sides of where they feel, how they feel about religion, how they feel about the LGBTQ community, how they feel about everything. How do you approach your work, working cooperatively with the rest of the company, when you know that you are working on behalf of a brand that employs people who are all over the place in terms of how they feel about the world? And that some ideas you might have for how you want to make the brand more progressive may not be what they would necessarily want to see.
Me first? Okay.
Only you.
Oh, only me. Oh, okay.
Well, she touched on it a little bit, and I have other questions for other people.
Got it. So I would say, from a Mars standpoint, so I want to talk Mars just a little bit, and then M&M specifically. So from a Mars standpoint, we really do champion a culture where people should feel confident and comfortable bringing their full selves to work. Our approach collectively to DEI is championed throughout the organization. So it doesn't matter, small acts, large acts, etc. There's always an opportunity for folks to get involved, because that exposure to different cultures, to different perspectives is so important to help be more reflective of the communities we serve. And that is something that we champion at Mars, not only in the workplace, but also outside in our own communities. And for associates like me, and also my fellow associates, we do feel that impact, not only professionally, but also personally. So overall, Mars is a very supportive culture. And then within that then helps clear the runway, if you will, for brands to really lean in with conviction, with confidence, and a perspective that our associates are proud of, and also our senior leaders are proud of. And so as we think about being more reflective of the communities we serve, it shows up in brand behaviors on M&Ms, particularly because I have a purpose that says I want to help create a world where everybody feels they can belong, right? So that's inclusivity, that's representation, and most importantly, that celebration of not only the things that make us different, but also the similarities that we all have.
Which leads me to another thought, because as a company navigates through culture, there has to be some bit of consensus. So in many of your cases, these are very old, very successful legacy companies with some strong brand attributes. And in many cases as well, being led by people that have been within the company for a long time. So when you have an idea, and this is for anybody who wants to jump in, so when you have an idea in your particular area of purview, that might be pushing the envelope a little bit, because that's your job in a way. Not every idea is going to be accepted, but they've charged you with helping the company stay current. How does one navigate those conversations with your bosses, your senior leadership, when it's very easy for them to say, wait, what? Things are working really well right now. Why do we want to do that? What are some of the tricks? Because what I often say to people is that I came out of a media sales background, and people say, well, that's a really weird, hard pivot for you in a 40-year career. That 12 years ago, you went into a chief diversity officer, which is really more about persuasion. You can't force anyone to do anything, but you can suggest something. And I said, what do you think all that 30 years in media sales was? And that's all media sales is making sure that everyone feels like they won. That's what I do. It's all sales, no matter what job I think you have. So how do you incorporate that when sometimes when you're new too, it's even harder, because they're like, what, Denise? No, we don't do it like that here. How does one, not that they say that to you, but how does one answer that when you think that that's not the way we've done it? Why would you want to do that now? Anybody who wants to jump in?
And you all look at me. So I love that question, because I think that's what our jobs are as leaders, is to, challenge the status quo, but doing it in the right way. So it's understanding the legacy of the company, the brands. In our case, it's also our bottlers as well, to understand all the different perspectives that we have. And then, I'm very conscious of, I've only been with my organization for 2 years. A lot of people have been there for 20 plus. And so when I'm bringing a different perspective to the table, but again, I believe that's part of my job, right? It's coming with the data, it's coming with a clear point of view, helping folks see also around corners what's out there waiting for us, because it would be easy for us to not do that work. But it's important for us to have the conversations, and it's all against the Coca-Cola company's purpose, right? Our purpose is to refresh the world and make a difference. So if we have that as our North Star, and we work within that, then we can have those conversations and we can be productive together. But I do want to be clear, it's never easy, right? But it is the right work to do.
Yeah, so I would add and say you can't ever walk away from business fundamentals. And so as a leader, my responsibility is to inspire. My responsibility is to influence. And then I can't underestimate the power of building really deep relationships. And so one of the things that I did not do was answer one of your questions around belonging and what is the definition of belonging? And I like to use an adage that most folks have heard, that, belonging is, that diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but I believe belonging is picking the venue, picking the music, helping to select the food. So you're very much a part of all of the decisions that are being made. And so as a leader, our goal is to empower others to do great things. But as I walk into a new environment, I walk in with those fundamentals at the forefront of how am I going to guide, how am I going to lead, how will I inspire, and how do I build trust? And so to your point, Kristen, we've got to have good data, and we do take good data, but sometimes it's just an instinct, and you've got to know when it's the right moment to lean in and when it's the right moment to pull back. You've got to know which battles are worth fighting and which battles are not worth fighting at this moment. You must understand what's your political equity and how much of it do you have, and how much of it am I willing to expend for this particular item. So it's basic business fundamentals, but inside of all of that must be your own passion and your own conviction. And I would say that I think the one key attribute that is so needed and so necessary is courage. You have to have the courage to lean in when you think it's appropriate to lean in, because if we're going to make the kind of changes that need to be made, then not only do I have to build community, but I've got to be very intentional about what I do and why I do it. And if I'm going to help others, I've got to have the courage to put myself on the line to say, no, you're going to take this person, and here's why you're going to take this person, and here's what I can commit to doing to ensure that this person is ready for you to take. So you've just got to ensure that you stick with the fundamentals.
I love that, and I think that the part two of that I learned, because again, I'm in my 12th or 13th year in this job, and I will say honestly, I spent probably the better part of the first 2 years, even though I had a lot of years with the company and was known as an executive, but I was in an operational role in television stations, running TV stations. I had to spend the first 2 years building that equity with the business leaders and the trust that I wasn't going to be a saber rattler who didn't understand that our core mission was to make money. So I would say, in addition to courage, patience. Not endless patience, but patience. Because if you try to, I found that if you try to move it too quickly, you'll get a rebound effect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And openness, listening to where the change that you're about to introduce to the industry or to the group or the storytellers or the artists shaping what they're going to do, the change that you're introducing, the importance of listening to where they feel a little earthquake in what you're bringing to the table about it. I did have, and thank you for the point on courage, I've had some challenge from executives saying, wait, no, how dare you claim that women were doing this, and that you can't call them animators, you can't call them. They were, again, these deeply entrenched beliefs that we have to gently unearth and examine and change. I believe it's Schopenhauer that said, when you introduce the truth, I'm going to paraphrase here, 3 things happen. At first it's denied. And then it's vehemently denied, even violently denied. And then it's accepted as if it's always been established truth. We are funny beings as humans. We have to kind of evolve through our process sometimes. And so patience is an openness and listening to. So thank you for the point on patience. I think that's something I have to. Okay, wait, they're only at the first level of that. They're denying it. Okay. All right, let's guide them through.
Which is about meeting people where they are as well.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Not so that with the intention of them staying there, but so that you can bring them along, but you have to acknowledge where they are. Yeah. I saw you raise your
Yeah, and I was just going to add another C to the mix here. I think, part of being courageous is also maintaining a level of curiosity and like instilling that into your teams. And so as a leader, leading a large team that's responsible for like really bringing to the public like understanding of what it is we do and what we stand for, I'm always challenging my team and my leadership cohort to think about curiosity as our superpower and what we're, and what we're delivering to the community. Because keeping a pulse on what's happening outside of the walls, most organizations, can be a little insular. You're inside the walls talking about the same things over and over, and sometimes you're missing the bigger view of like what's happening out in the world. And I think just really encouraging folks to stay curious is a part of, really enacting on courage.
Can I build on that? Just one more build. So not a C, but a G. Because when you mentioned patience, I think what really sparked to me and what I, actively am coaching my team on is allowing ourselves some grace, right? So if we have and keep our eye on that North Star, like I said, we launched our purpose and committed to it in 22. It is a journey. We're here for the long game, right? And so oftentimes the path may get wavy. We're learning, but there's conviction and courage and confidence and curiosity in pursuit of that North Star. And I think allowing ourselves some grace carries a lot of weight, particularly as we think about just, the path and the journey we're on and the weight that we're carrying with us too.
I love that, and I'll tell you, because that actually leads into the final question I'm going to ask before I turn it over to the group, and I have like 5 more in case the group doesn't come up with anything, because I've always got them in my back pocket. But what I would say in this job over the past 12 years, certainly I know you've all seen it yourselves, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but it's just a reality and has added a challenge to the job, and that is that some of our earlier career colleagues from different generations are, thank goodness, pushing activists. I mean, this is what we want from young people. They want them to push. But I will tell you, I see Denise smiling, that I can tell you that, you know, we're our company will be 100 years old in 2026, and we're owned by Comcast, a very large company, and employees will regularly email me directly, which I love, and some of these people are in their first job with the company, so they're quite young, and they'll say, like, why are we doing X, and why don't we take a stand on Y, and how about Z? I'm ashamed that I work for this company when I just read this. So I take a deep breath, I take a walk outside, I have some lunch, because otherwise I'll start cussing, and then I have to come back and take it on. We don't want to discourage those conversations, but how does one navigate them? Because, I mean, I could be these kids' grandfather, truly, and what I want to say is, you know what, look me up in 40 years. And then you'll see, I mean, after you have some real life experience, but you don't want to turn that spark off. How do you handle those inquiries and those questions? And I mean, sometimes in very public forums, how do we navigate it? And that's not just for this group, I'm looking for some tips.
You probably don't want my answer. I would just tell you, I love all things, and my wonderful assistant's with me today, and he's a young man who's about to graduate from college, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. And so I love young people, and I do all things young people. So that's just my little side hustle. I love them. I think they're crazy. They think I'm crazy. And so I would always tell my girls growing up, you know, if you're going to be crazy, remember, I can be crazier. So I think that the real secret here, you know, with impacting this generation is helping them to understand your point is valid. And you really might be smarter than me. And I love the courage that you all have. I love the convictions. I mean, even I have a 20-something-year-old daughter who called me this morning, and she started a new job on yesterday. So she said her boss would send her these long text messages, and she's not going to read them. So this morning she told him, well, please don't send me the long text messages. Send me something else. I don't even know what technology she mentioned. She referenced some technology I was like, really? You did that?
Slack or something?
Slack, yeah, that's exactly what it was. She said, well, send me a Slack.
I'm hip.
And I'm like,
Ask
what?
me about this stuff.
It's like, well, I'm glad your name is on the marquee, right? But the point in working with them is I help them understand you might be smarter, and as you should be, because you've grown up in this digital age, but you're not going to be wiser. And if you think your smarts are going to take you every place you need to go, you have to think again. You need wisdom. And one of the things that I started to do in my last role, because I found it to be fundamentally important, was pairing someone that was young with someone that was very seasoned in their career changes the game. Because they're going to fire up and speed up the old person. But the old person is going to give them the wisdom and the experience.
You mean the more seasoned person?
The more seasoned person. You said, oh, you're old. So, you know.
Referring to myself. That's different.
But they're going to, they're going to help the more seasoned employee get there. But the more seasoned employee is going to take the experience and the wisdom and do some level setting, for that Generation Zer, that they have alongside them. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and you have to see it as such. But you do have to do some level setting to help them understand that, you will never be able to trump wisdom. And I'll give you, I probably shouldn't give this example because I'm so new to Walmart, but I did have a situation, since I've already been at Walmart, in a meeting where a Generation Zer endeavored to go toe-to-toe with me. And it's like, you're never going to win that, because I have, a whole myriad of questions. You've got two, but I've got 1,022 from all these years of experience of working in all these different companies and all these different industries. I've seen, I've seen this before a time or two, multiple times before. And so to get them to respect the experience and the wisdom, and then we must respect the agility and respect the flexibility and, quite frankly, the courage that they have and the commitment. As my daughter said, don't hold it against me that I'm committed to my own well-being. They are deeply committed to their own well-being.
Yeah, I think there's an important level of respect there, and I find that's why I teach. I find I oftentimes do more educating in the boardroom than I do in the classroom. I learn more in the classroom sometimes, and I by keeping a foot in both worlds, I'm bringing more of my educator presence in studio settings and in corporate settings, sometimes more so than the classroom. But oftentimes, too, we're also placed in a position to be the educators. Oh, this is where I get to teach you something, but you're not going to know I'm teaching you. That's that great sense of wisdom that you're talking about.
Oh, sometimes I tell them I'm teaching them, actually.
Yeah, and there's times you do need
truly,
to be very straightforward.
And Pat knows this but what I have found is that through some very difficult conversations over the past year or so, with some young employees who want to go toe-to-toe with me, I make sure that it's a one-on-one, because that is, I think, a much healthier environment. I take it offline from the group, because then you can really talk to them and show them some transparency. In almost every case, once you've told them your rationale, they still may not agree with it. In fact, very often they won't. But at least you've given them the respect of telling them where we're coming from. Then they can make the decision on whether or not this is for them. You know?
And demonstrating it as well. Yeah. I think being an example is always key.
I believe we are going to questions. I don't know what I think I'm getting very close to time, because I can. Okay, sorry. Pat's like, yes, very close to time. Is there? Okay, yes, please.
I love what you said about bringing your wisdom to the boardroom as well, because one of the things that I'm interested in is, it seems like I'd be interested to know how much of your struggle is also looking above you at the gatekeepers. Because as a film director, I see what you're talking about the inclusion. And then I look at the example of George Floyd uprising, because I live in Minneapolis, and so I'm super aware of the powers that be in that situation, that Derek Chauvin had 3 other officers with him on his neck. And so that came from a culture from above. That didn't come from below so much, it came from above. And so how can we look above and change the gatekeepers?
That's a big one. Patience. And for me, I find, as a filmmaker as well, when you're going in to pitch or present a story, I have to remind myself, again, that's where I apply my educator skills of, I have to inform them why what I'm about to impart is so important to them. It's like a higher level of educating, rather than just spelling out facts. The history at Disney, the entrenched culture at Disney is about great storytelling. But we've had one iconic man, brilliant storyteller, at the forefront of that. And few people realize there were thousands of artists and workers underneath. And so finding a way to bring life to these people, understanding the artists that work there, but then getting a sense of understanding about those above you. That's a tough one. What you posed is challenging.
Well, I have had the advantage of working for some great leaders who truly are committed to DEI, from Brian Roberts, Ralph Roberts, Brian Roberts, and other leaders to our current leader, Mike Kavanaugh. So I don't pretend that I haven't had that advantage. Denise has Doug McMillan. So I don't dismiss that, but I will say that there still are times when one must bring forth what is important to you, but be very thoughtful about how it's going to be received, and again, meet them where they are. Because if I go in and I say we have to do this diversity initiative because the employees expect it, and because we need to be doing this, and the press wants to hear about it too. If I'm the CEO, that doesn't sound very compelling to me. But if you dig down and say this is not only about doing the right thing. This is about recruitment and retention, because when our employees see that we're doing this, they're going to want to stay here. They're going to be more productive. And the press picks it up, and that's going to make us become the studio of choice for diverse storytellers. So there is nothing wrong with putting it through the lens of benefiting the business, because in every case, the work that we're doing can be tied back to making our organization stronger. So some people say, well, I shouldn't have to prove the business case. Well, maybe you shouldn't have to, but I guarantee you will get better results if you do. So just take the moment, and it's not what you want. Think about how what you are proposing, I believe, can help the organization, because there's always a way.
You know, one of the bigger challenges I've had is getting an entire industry to understand. Someone brought up about the point about we've only had so few women directing. And when you realize we've all missed out on not hearing these incredible stories. It's taken two sides to move our civilization forward, men and women working together. There are things women can do, men cannot. And we have to have that balance. And so when they understand, once people are educated and understand, oh, I've missed out on something here. What? Maybe I should pay attention.
So I would love to go and start drinking and continue this conversation over a Bloody Mary. But I'm getting the wrap-up sign. I'm going to ask each of you if you would give me a 30-second final thought. It could be about something we've already talked about. It can be a word of advice to people on how they can become involved. What would you want? What is the last thing you're going to impart? And we're going to leave our hosts, Denise and Casey, for last. They will have the final word, but Kristen, I'll start with you.
I would say with all of this, with purpose, trying to, advance conversations, it all needs to start with employees first. And if you start with employees and you're very clear on, what you're trying to accomplish from a purpose and values perspective, you can really have that authenticity and consistency and have that success moving forward. So employees first is a really important part of our strategy at Coca-Cola, and I would encourage all of you to think about that from your own organizations as well.
You can never go wrong with that. That's right. Thank you. Mindy.
Ooh, that's a big one. I look to the past to enlighten the future. Is a large part of what I do. And I think the more we do that, it shows us a grounding that we have gone through this before, or there is an example ahead of from our past that I can learn from to help guide me in what I have ahead. I think that's true for organizations, for businesses, and we've missed out on a lot from our past. So I would maybe leave that as
wonderful.
A point.
Chanel?
I would probably say not to underestimate the power of the fingerprints we leave on these communities, right? I think there's an underlying notion of empowerment, not only empowerment that we lend ourselves, our teams, our peers, our friends, etc. But I think it can be really meaningful when we put it in the context of us leaving our individual fingerprints on communities, whether big or small actions.
Wonderful. Casey?
This won't be an original thought because I heard it
recently. They don't have to be original. It's okay.
But going back to the idea of courage, I think courage over comfort every day, especially when we're thinking about work that is purpose-driven, is a place that I like to be, and it's a place that I like to lead, and would love to see in a lot of leaders across all sectors, because when you're opting for being courageous and always doing the right thing, you cannot go wrong.
And Denise, bring us home.
I would say that there is power in numbers. Never underestimate the power of the consortium. Bring others along. If it's real, meaningful, impactful change that you're trying to drive, bring others alongside you. Have others come along with you. Inspire others to help you, and if you go as a group, it's very difficult to say no. So think about the consortium, think about who you have alongside you, and go out and drive some meaningful change.
Please join me in thanking this fabulous panel. So many pearls of wisdom. Thank you. And thank all of you for choosing to spend an hour with us. I know there were a lot of places you could be, especially on such a gorgeous day, but thank you for spending it inside with us. Have a great rest of the day.